Hey everyone, welcome back to the Speak Up Erika podcast. I'm your host, Erika, and this podcast talks about topics that we're afraid to speak up about but should. Today's guest is Edline. Hey Edline.
Hello.
Welcome back. If you all missed out on episode 1, I actually had Edline as my featured guest and we talked about fear. But Edline, can you give us a little refresher about who you are?
Of course. And first, I'd like to say congrats on your podcast and making it this far. Woohoo. And my name is Edline. My pronouns are she/her. I currently work at the Ontario government doing HR, and I am VP People and Culture at Locals Festival.
Yay.
Yeah. And I was the first guest on your podcast, so it's very exciting to be back.
Yeah, it's crazy that was like 39 episodes ago, if you think about it. Yeah. So, yay. Today's topic will be about growing up as Asian, and Edlin and I are both going to be sharing our experiences, bringing up Stop Asian Hate, and how to support AAPI communities. And yeah, we're just going to talk a little bit about that. Before getting into the topic, I'm just going to ask Edlin a fun question, just because this topic is going to be pretty heavy. So to keep it lighthearted for now, Edlin, my question is, if you could be any cartoon character on any show, who would you be and why? And I could share mine after if you want.
Okay. Could you share yours first? I need to think.
Yeah, shit. I was like, I actually don't know. Okay, hold on, wait. Top of my head, just because I've been watching this show a lot.
Mm-hmm.
So I've been watching Futurama a lot.
Oh.
And I think it'd be so funny to be Zoidberg. I don't know if
Is
you've
that
ever
the
watched.
robot?
No, it's the little weird squid lobster thing.
Oh, I was
Like,
always afraid of that character.
yeah, Dr. Zoidberg. I think his character is so weird and funny, and he just like makes the funniest noises. So
Does he
yeah,
does he talk? I honestly haven't seen that show in so long. Like, does he
he
say real words or is it just like mumbles or
yeah he says real world. Oh, you know what? Oh, I don't know if that's not a cartoon though. I was gonna say I would love to be Groot, and all I would say is like
Oh,
I am Groot and like
yeah.
dance around and be a tree and stuff. But I don't think that's a cartoon. But yeah, Dr. Zoidberg, he does say words.
Mm-hmm.
He just has like a funny accent because he has that like flubber thing.
Mm-hmm. That's so
Yeah,
funny.
that's really random, but yeah.
The first thing that came to my head was Katara from Last Avatar.
Jeez,
Just
yeah,
because she's like a freaking badass. And like,
yeah.
I think that if I were a part of that world, I'd probably be like a waterbender or an airbender.
I'd probably be Earth.
Mm,
I think I'd
yeah,
be in Earth. Yeah.
I could see that.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. So to kick off this topic, my first question is, if you didn't know, Edlin and I are sisters, so we grew up in the same household, same parents and stuff. Um, but what was your experience like being Filipino and growing up? Because of course, like that's different from mine.
Mm-hmm. That's a pretty broad topic, I
Mm-hmm.
would say. Like, I feel like there's so many aspects into it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, the first thing, I guess, is like just early childhood memories of identifying myself as like a Filipino person, I would say, is like the language. So like our parents, they speak to us in Tagalog, which is the Filipino dialect that they use. There
Mm-hmm.
are like other ones too, but yeah, that's like the dialect that they like talk to us in. And I remember like getting that dictionary, and
The
they would like,
Filipino dictionary.
yeah,
Yeah.
and they would like try to like teach us words like from that. And I guess just like learning different words like from that, and them talking to us, like that's like my earliest childhood memories. And the way that even like we pronounce English words in like Filipino, like, you know what
Yeah.
I mean?
Yeah.
Like
Like
what
drawer.
yeah.
You open the drawer, or can
like
you
polysporin,
turn
like
on
polysporin or
yeah,
polysporin.
Balisporin, yeah, or I would say, can you open the light?
Yeah, like
Yeah, and
just
then
like
it's like
grammatical and like pronunciation. Like I never like noticed that it was wrong until like someone would like laugh at me or something like that.
true, yeah. And they're
Mm-hmm.
like, why do you say it like that? And you're like, what do you mean? Is this not normal?
Mm-hmm. Or
Mm-hmm.
even like referring to you like in like a group setting. I remember when we used to take piano lessons and I would be like, oh, ate, like could
Mm-hmm.
you blah blah blah, and then like the whole class would be like, that's not her name.
Yeah. You're like, no, this is like Filipino culture.
Mm-hmm.
This means like older sister, blah, blah, and you have to explain yourself for everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. That's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I guess I could attest to the same thing. I think thinking about like childhood as well. And so we grew up in Milton, and at the time, it was majority Caucasian, but a lot of people from different cultures started moving in, and the city or the town, sorry, started expanding. So there were other people who looked like us as well, like there are other Filipinos around. But I think like so the blog post that you wrote in Locals Festival, and for those who don't know what I'm talking about, Locals Festival is an online festival that Edline and I are a part of. We support locals and give back to the community. But side note, we started a blog. So Edline actually wrote a blog post called Stop Asian Hate, and she talked about her personal experience in that. And she brought up that the difficulty of thinking, am I Filipino? Am I Asian? Am I Canadian? And I feel like comments that would get brought up is like, oh, you're a banana, like yellow on the outside but white on the inside, or
Mm-hmm.
like like that's like a kid like something that people would say in elementary, I feel like.
Mm-hmm.
Or I know that there was this thing where I would make fun of my own self for being Asian, and I'd be like, did you say that Asian? And I would like squint my eyes and do this, and then people would think it's like hilarious. But
Yeah.
low-key, it's like I don't know if being racist to yourself is a thing, but it's like I'm laughing at my own culture because I don't know, like I guess I'm not accepting. It's hard to accept who you are as a kid if you're confused about who you really are, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So you kind of just make jokes and laugh about it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Um, but yeah, that's like part of it, and part of like trying to conform to white culture was also what you brought up too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like that's such like a huge thing, like in identifying myself, and like I'm sure like you felt the same way. Like growing up, I feel like now reflecting on how I thought about things and why I did certain things, it was definitely because I was Canadian and I am like Filipino too. And before, like I would not like to say that. Like I wouldn't want to identify with the Filipino culture and be different. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, and like that's like really sad. Like I
Mm-hmm.
like to think about that. Like it's pretty sad. Like I would not want to really learn the language or like eat the
Yeah.
food in class because like of other people might think I'm like different or weird or something.
Mm-hmm.
And like even like the Filipino accent or something, like we never had an accent, but you know, like our parents and stuff do.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, we were born and raised in Canada where we were whitewashed, and like that's a thing where if you go back to the Philippines, like they'll know like right away that like you're from Canada
Yeah.
just by
Yeah.
the way you talk and stuff.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's true. Yeah, I think you bringing up like the accent part too, if people would be like, "Oh, you're fob," or "You're so fob," and then you would get really defensive, like, "I'm not fob. Like, why would you call me fob?" Blah blah blah, and you don't want to accept like your roots.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and also bringing Filipino food to class. I guess that's like a big thing too. You'd be like, no, just like pack pizza. I don't want to bring the adobo and dinugo on, like blah blah
Yeah.
blah. It's gonna stink. Oh, like, or maybe you're just thinking to yourself, it's gonna stink in class. But I know There's like, I'm remembering right now, I don't know if anyone has ever watched Jokoy. So he's like a half Filipino, half white comedian. And he brought up that he brought ginile or some type of Filipino dish to class when he was a kid. And he was trying to make it sound sexy, but it was like,
I can't remember the food, but I remember what
yeah,
you're
he was
talking
trying to
about.
make the food sound sexy and like
Yeah.
it wasn't normal in like Western culture, so it sounded gross. It wasn't like pizza and fries. But yeah, it's like I think with anyone who's also an immigrant or has immigrant parents and grew up for like a cultural background can also feel the same way as being embarrassed to bringing their own cultural foods to class, which is sad because like that's who you are.
Yeah, it is really sad. You brought up Jokoy, and I just wanted to bring up a fact how, like, I remember growing up, like, I don't know if you thought the same thing, but like, I remember like wishing that I was like Asian or something, like half white and half Asian, or like if you curled your hair and then you'd be like, oh, like I'm half black and half Asian. Like I don't know if that was just because I like didn't want to be like fully Filipino, or like if I just wanted to, I don't know, like identify as like
Not who you are.
yeah.
Yeah,
But
interesting. Yeah.
mhm.
I remember one of my another earliest childhood memories. I remember going to the washroom with mom, and we saw
Mhm.
like some black girls and their friends hanging out, and they're like, "Oh, I love your hair." It's no, I told her because her hair was super curly, and I'm like, "Wow, I love your hair. Can I have it?" And
Oh.
like they're all laughing, and they're like, "Yeah, sure. Like, can I have your hair? It's like super straight." I'm like, "Yeah, take it." And I
Mhm.
was like 3 or 4 years old.
Oh.
And my mom was like, ha 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 ha, and just like left because she's like, what?
Yeah.
But I think that's crazy because I wonder if when I was younger, if that's the part of me was thinking that way that you're bringing up right now, that I wanted to
Mhm.
be something that I'm not because I'm embarrassed about who I was.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
food for thought. That's kind of crazy. Um, Also, conforming to Western culture was something you brought up too in the blog about, dyeing your hair lighter or
Mhm.
wanting to have fairer skin. And, do you
Yeah.
want to share about a little bit about that as well and how that affected like growing up?
I think like appearance is such a big thing. Like being up in the BIPOC community and also being a woman. Like first being a woman in general, like you just have to deal with like comparing yourself and like other people and girls like being like mean to you or whatever, and then going through puberty and all that stuff. And like yeah, there's just so much going into like that aspect of like being a girl. And um like first being an Asian girl is
Mm-hmm.
like growing up, I remember just not liking my hair color or my eye color and wishing that like I could, I don't know, like be whiter or have like lighter hair or like different colored eyes. Like I think that maybe that came to me, like that thought, just because of the people who I would look up to, like Ariana Grande or
Mm.
like like Lizzie McGuire. Like I like loved Lizzie McGuire, and that's probably why I thought that, because I always thought saw those characters on the TV and wanted to like look more like them. So like things that I think we've both done is like dye our hair, get contact lenses. And a big thing in like Philippine culture and like I think Asian culture in general is that they would lighten their skin, which is first of all like really bad for your skin. Like
Mm-hmm.
melanin is like necessary for you not to get like skin cancer and all that stuff. Like it's good for you. And yeah, there's like products out there in the Asian market that specifically turn your skin lighter, which is so messed up to think about.
Mm-hmm.
But but yeah, I would like avoid the sun and like avoid getting more tan because I didn't want to do that. Or like I've even like edited my photos in the past to make my skin look lighter, which is
Oh, wow. Yeah.
yeah, which is like not healthy to think about. And I feel like even in our family culture, like we have an aunt who her nickname was growing up, I think it was Nog Nog, and
Mhm.
like that's like such a horrible nickname. Like,
Mhm.
yeah, and it was because her skin was darker, and they would like call her that. Yeah,
Mhm.
so those are some things that like I
Yeah.
personally did growing up, and I think one thing that made me realize that it was like kind of normal what I was doing because other people were like doing that as well, but also like made me realize to just accept who I am naturally is Shay Mitchell. She shared because she's half Irish, I believe, and half Filipino. And she shared like photos of herself, I think on her YouTube channel, like wanting to be more white or fit in with her white friends. And I think she grew up in Vancouver. So I
Mhm.
think there's like more white people there or whatever. It's Canada in general. So it might be
Mhm.
the same as Ontario. But yeah, like that was, I think, one of the times where I felt like, okay, it's not just me like thinking that way. And it is like normal, like to think that way, but also to make me realize that I don't need to be thinking that way and I can accept who I am. And I
Mhm.
feel like that's why she's one of my celebrity crushes as well, is
Mhm.
because I just admire that about her. And she's like also Filipino. So like I like identify with that. But yeah.
Yeah, I feel like you brought up
Yeah.
a lot of points there. Like one of them is definitely representation of the Filipino community in media is a huge thing. And
Mm-hmm.
then the other point you brought up is like Filipino culture and Asian culture trying to fit in with Western standards of like white looking whiter and having whiter skin, and that
Mm-hmm.
plays a huge part of like beauty standards in Asian culture.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I think growing up there was never a Filipino character in a show, and it was slowly changing as we grew up, like Shay Mitchell and Pretty Little Liars. I'm sure that was like 2013 or something. Like,
Yeah.
but it was far into us being kids, like we were already in high school or university or something, I
Mm-hmm.
think. And then recently now, like I watch Superstore. I don't know if anyone else watches Superstore, but one of the characters on that show, he's Filipino, and they bring up the Tagalog language. They talk about the Filipino culture, and it's super cool to see that because you just never saw that before. And
Mm-hmm.
then another one is also Blue's Clues. I don't know if you saw
Oh,
that one
no,
on
I
Twitter.
haven't.
So on Blue's Clues, the newest character of like, you know how Joe keeps changing? Well, it was like Steve, then Joe, and now I don't remember his name, but it's another character because everyone keeps going to school or college or something. So
Yeah.
they have to look after Blue. But anyway, so the new character, he's Filipino, and he
Oh,
has his Lola come over and like make a Filipino dish.
wow. I
So
never knew that.
yeah, so it's super cool to see like Filipino culture come into like media and have
Mm-hmm.
representation of things that you just never saw before. I think like another thing that I just recently thought about is that I think Filipinos are sometimes not seen as Asian enough. I don't know
Mm,
if that makes sense, but in comparison to maybe other Asian, like maybe Koreans, Japanese, Chinese people, we don't look the same as them. And I mean,
mm,
some Filipino people do because of their descent. They may have more may have more Chinese culture in their background. Um, but I know I've heard this term a lot that Filipinos are the blacks of Asians.
oh, yeah.
Yeah, I
Like
don't.
I heard like the mutts of the Asian culture because like we're so mixed. Like I feel like Filipinos, they either look like really Chinese even, and then some of them look like really Filipino, and then others have like they could have like curly hair or something. So
Mm-hmm.
there is like a really big diversity of how like Filipinos can look. And I think,
Yes.
yeah, like
Yeah.
that's important too in terms of representation and
Mm-hmm.
having people like look like you to help you accept yourself. Yeah.
Definitely. I mean, there's a lot of work to still be done. Like with movies like Black Panther coming out, that was huge because it was like a full Black cast. Like people who made the movie were all Black, and that was just like never done before. Similar to Crazy Rich Asians, the same thing. It was huge for Asians because the Asians being represented and people who made it as well, right? There's pros and there is definitely cons, because even when the Korean movie, it like won awards and stuff.
Oh, Parasite.
Yeah. So when that Korean movie came out, Parasite, and it won like awards, but then there was so much backlash because people were like, well, why did this win an award? It wasn't even in English. Like, why do I have to read subtitles? Like, that doesn't make sense. So people were ignorant about Asian movies in that sense, I guess. But yeah, that's like my little bit about Asian representation in media. And I feel like we can go on and on about that.
Yeah, that's like a whole like topic in
For
itself.
sure, it's huge. And I'm sure that other cultures can also feel the same way of not having their culture represented in media as well. I think also you bringing up the whole whitening your skin. I know one of my favorite YouTubers, Asia Jackson. I don't know if you've heard of her.
No, I don't think I've
So
watched her.
when I brought this topic up about like whitening your skin and stuff, and when the whole Black Lives Matter movement was happening last year, and it was Asians being part of being allies and stuff, and it's like unlearning what you know is like a huge part of it. But pretty much, okay, I digress. Asia Jackson, she's half Black, half Filipino, and she started this I guess it's like a campaign called Morena Skin. And Morena means like darker skin in Filipino, right? So it's embracing like your skin color and being Asian, and that like no matter what skin color you have, like just to accept who you are and stuff like that. So
Wow.
which is huge, because for me, I know you brought up like our aunt or our tita, we call it as it is, our ninang, which means like aunt or slash
Like
godmother.
yeah.
So I was also like I tan very easily and I get really dark. And it's funny because last weekend we were just on a call with our grandma, and she's like, oh my gosh, why are you so dark? Why are you so dark?
Yeah.
Like half the call was just her calling out my skin color. And it's because they grew up in a time, like she was born in 1920s, like that is such a long time ago, and it's so different how they thought and how they grew up and what they think, so but yeah, I was
their beauty
always
standards was like always like pushed onto us because they were born in that time period, and they would be like, oh, you should be like whiter, or even like your nose should be more pointed. Like that was a big one too. Like I think a common practice in like Philippine culture is when you have your baby, like for the viewers who are listening in, like your mother would pinch your nose and like literally try to shape it to be more pointed, which is so messed up because obviously that's not going to change your nose from being how it's going to look. And and like that's just like a thing that they would do to babies in hopes of making it more pointed.
I actually did that all the time growing up, in hopes that my nose would not be like an Asian nose. Because if you know Filipinos or like Filipino culture, they make fun of their flat noses, and like Filipinos' noses are like a little bit flatter and wider, and that's who they are, and people did not like that about themselves or wanted to obviously conform again. So yeah, all the time growing up, I would always, like, every day I'd be pinching my nose, hoping that it would get like, oh, that's actually so sad.
It is.
It's so sad because it's like you just don't love yourself for who you are. But I would always be doing that to myself. And yeah, even like having like my eyes are not as squinty, I guess. So people are like, oh wow, like your eyes are big or something. Or I would always like try to make them bigger, or they have circle lenses, or they have like eye tape to not have a monolid, there's so much we can go on about
I
that.
know. Yeah, I feel like like Filipinos too, they're always like the culture kind of is like they like tease you.
Toxic.
Yeah, like that's like an aspect to it where they just like tease you about things and
But yeah, I think one of my last points about talking about Asian representation, not only is it wanting to see, like, not seeing our culture represented, but seeing
mhm.
how we're represented as well. So
Yes.
that's like a huge one. I don't know if anyone saw, but there was this post on Instagram, and it was about how representing Asian women in culture, Asian women in media affects like how we think of Asian women. So I think that is a huge thing because they see us like as objects, or they have a lot of people get fetishes for Asian women because of it.
Mhm.
And it's like someone who is weak, small, submissive, does whatever you want, cleans the house, cooks, like,
Mhm.
old school thinking that doesn't like it, that's just horrible, and we're not. Yeah,
Yeah.
just the way that we're portrayed is awful.
Yeah, I
um
think that was one of the lines that I wrote in the blog post was that like I'm guilty of conforming to those stereotypes that people would put onto me. And like when I was writing that blog post, I was like just reflecting on like who I am and like if what who I am is even like true to who I am because of people's cultural like stereotypes and things that I believed myself into, which is really like messed up to think about. And like sometimes I still think if it is true or if it's actually a personality trait that I have and not like someone saying that I'm that way. But growing up, the main thing is like, oh, you have such a soft voice, like you're so soft spoken and quiet and like blah, blah, blah. And even like you're smart, you're probably good at math because you're Asian. And I avoided like doing good in math just because of that. And I didn't want to be like that. Yeah, which is, I wish I was better at math. Like, if no one put that onto me, like, maybe I would have been like a scientist or I don't know, like a mathematician. But I like thought about not doing it because people like put it onto myself. So,
mhm.
yeah, I think that's another aspect into that.
Yeah, definitely. The stereotypes of Filipino women and Filipino people in general. There's a lot. Like the math thing, you can sing karaoke, you can sing, you can
Mm,
dance, you're gonna be a nurse, or you are a
yes.
nurse, or you're studying to be a nurse. And also maganda ka. I think one of my huge pet peeves is when people ask you, "Oh, what are you? Are you Filipino?" And then you kind of cringe because
Yeah.
what the reply is gonna be next, and it's like,
Yeah.
"Yeah, I'm Filipino," and that makes you dismiss who you are or hate your culture even more. People will be like, "Oh, you're Filipino? Like, kamusta ka? Maganda, maganda ka,"
Yeah.
and you're just like, "Mahal kita." And if no one knows what these words mean, it means, "Hi, how are you? Beautiful." And I love you. I can see both sides if
Yeah,
like you're
like they just want
genuine.
to connect with you and like they think that they're doing a good thing. And I feel like it is a good thing to be curious about someone's culture and like wanting to connect on that level, but also there's a time to be
Time and
curious.
place.
Yeah, a time to be curious and like ask questions and a time to put your assumptions on if someone's Filipino and like they must know Tagalog when there's like other dialects as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Or sometimes I know some of my friends, if someone asks them that or says that to them, they're like, "Oh, I don't speak Tagalog," even though they
Mhm.
do, and they just
Yeah.
say that because they're just annoyed about it. Yeah, sometimes it's like I don't know if people. You don't know if people are doing it out of good intention or if it's like I don't know. You have
Yeah.
different perspectives of people saying kind of that stuff to you.
Mhm.
Next, I kind of wanted to bring up like racial encounters, which I guess this kind of segues into it. And one of my most recent ones, so she's one of my friends, but she's like, "Oh, not to stereotype you, but like, do you know how to make lo mein?" And I was like,
Oh.
I was actually so shook because I was like, what the fuck is lo mein? Because
Yeah, is that
I never really,
noodles?
yeah, I think it's new. Like I don't like that's not part of Filipino culture
It's not.
or like Chinese culture. And I was just shook because I was like, first, what's lo mein? And because I don't eat it. And I was like, what? What are you talking about?
Mm, she could have asked you that, and she could have just asked it like in general, like not like, oh, not to be racist or anything, but like that's
That's
just a horrible thing to say. And like if you have a question, just like ask it. Like
yeah.
you don't have to associate it just with race.
Yeah, that's actually true. That's true. But I feel like that's how she's from like an older generation, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like maybe that's how people, I don't know. Yeah. I was
Yeah, like I'm sure she
sorry.
didn't have bad
No,
intentions.
yeah, I'm sure
Yeah.
she didn't. But it's like situations like that. And I think
Mm-hmm.
part of that and part of that older generation is, and sorry, I'm going to tie this back to media as well of how Asian people are
Uh-huh.
represented, is I recently watched Harold and Kumar, and I
Mm-hmm.
recently watched like all the Rush Hour movies, which Edline, me and you, we watched all the Rush Hour movies, and
Yeah.
you can see how people of color in general are depicted in those movies of like Black people in Rush Hour and Asian people in Rush Hour. And
Mm-hmm.
then you see it again in Harold and Kumar with brown people and then again with Asian people. And there's definitely a ton more movies like this where they have these stereotypes and like, oh, ching chong, like come over here, ling long, ling
Mm-hmm.
lang, like, and they say things like that. That's not acceptable.
Yeah.
Going back to racial encounters, I feel like race for Asians were seen as model minority. And to those who don't know what the term model minority means, is Asians are the minority that's super successful. They don't really have any problems. Like
Mm-hmm.
their racial encounters, I guess, are more so like dismissed because they're seen as a more like model type citizen and upstanding,
Yeah.
right? And then this takes away from people who don't fit this stereotype. And it's a lot of people don't fit this stereotype. There are a
Mm-hmm.
lot of people, Asian Americans, from this NBC News article. It says Asian Americans of lower socioeconomic status don't fit this model minority stereotype and are more likely to work in low wage industries like restaurants, salons, and factories, and that can make them more vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
And part of the reason why we're talking about this is because of the shooting that happened with in Atlanta, Georgia, with 8 people, Asian, most of them being Asian women, being murdered.
Mm-hmm.
And Asian women, like the victims of that shooting, have been historically oh my gosh, susceptible to sexual and physical violence. So that is like all part of the model minority myth.
Oh wow.
Yeah, yeah. We'll put more resources about it if people want to like look more into it.
Something I think I've seen it somewhere, or like something that I've like am guilty of, is like even as as an Asian woman, like sometimes you would be racist towards other races too. And I think that that's like something to be mindful of, and also unlearning that. And that's where, as like a model minority, is like when you might be silent when you see things because you want to like fit in into the white culture, and you won't stand up for someone when like it's the wrong thing, and like you might have even experienced something similar that you are seeing or that you are hearing. And I think that's why it's like so important to speak up now and to like gear away from trying to fit in and trying to just be silent and not say anything and just like go on and go with the system that's like so systemic and discriminative of people of color and of like us. Like,
Yes.
why do we want to support that? Like, you don't. And
Yeah.
I think, yeah, like that's something that I have done, and like I now like regret. Like, I wish that I stood up for when I saw those things, but like there were times where I just didn't because I didn't want to like put fuel to the fire. But I think that that's a fire that should happen, you know?
I
Yeah.
totally understand where you're coming from, and I think that also plays into to that idea that we have to be silent, we have to be small and submissive, and don't say
Mhm.
anything, and don't speak too loud. And it's like you, as like Asian women, they try to make you seem smaller, and that
Mhm.
can, like, that probably is also what carries into not being able to speak up because you've been told to not speak up for so long.
Yeah.
I feel like that could may be also a reason why that's like a part of it.
Yeah, I think like there's this thing called tiger parenting, I think that's what it's called, and it's like a form of like strict parenting where they, since they have this opportunity like in North America, Canada, America, like they want their kid to like achieve the most and do the most because like they have the opportunity. And I feel like growing up, like we did have that, but also our parents, they were not strict at all. Like they were very supportive and they did want us to achieve the most and do the most. And I think that, like, obviously as a parent, you would want that for your kid, but at the same time, it's like you want them to embrace like their culture as well. Yeah.
There's a definitely a barrier, I guess, or a boundary, I think,
Yeah.
where it's like you can be a parent that wants all the very best and is strict because they want the best, and then there's one that's like very extreme.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And I think like the one where they're like very extreme is like they might have also put on those stereotypes of being silent and stuff, like just so they could achieve in like this white world and stuff, you know what I mean? Like they might tell you like, oh, like don't speak like that language around other people because like you want to look and blend in. Like the parents might be teaching their kids to do that because
Mm-hmm.
like they would want them to succeed in that way, or they think that that's how their child is going to succeed. So I
Mm-hmm.
think that's also an issue is like the parents who like brought up their kids want the best for them, so they like teach them to become whitewashed or
Mm-hmm.
something of that sort. I
Mm-hmm.
think that it's important to also teach your child your own culture and be good with that, but also that's just a whole other can of worms of generational trauma, you know what I mean? Like your parents has like definitely experienced racism and they don't want you to. So maybe that's why they teach you those things so then you won't go on and experience that too.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, in a way to like get rid of that or change that way of thinking is to instead accept the culture and also try to conform in a way that isn't bad in that sense.
Yeah, it's crazy that you're talking about the generational trauma because definitely, like Philippines, for example, has been colonized so many different times, and
Mm-hmm.
there's definitely a lot of trauma. I actually don't know that much about Filipino history, and maybe it was
Yeah.
because I didn't want to learn about it, or I was just ashamed of my culture for a while. But we'll definitely put some links in the notes as well, and if anyone wants to learn more about just Asian culture and helping around that. Asian culture and the effects of the pandemic, and then
Mm-hmm.
talk about more of the shooting that happened, and kind of like what we can do as a society or as people or as Asians or non-Asians, as allies. So more about that afterwards as well. But
Mm-hmm.
yes, going back, how do you think the pandemic has affected you and like in terms of being Asian?
I would say that the pandemic in general has made me avoid the public and like groups of people. And I feel like before this, before the pandemic started, I worked part time like at a mall, and I would get like a lot of random people like talking to me. And if I were still working there, I feel like I would not want to face different types of people and afraid of not just getting the virus, but also like getting hate on you because of like who you are and being Asian.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely understand that. And there man, there's like a lot to say about this topic, and it's so heavy, and there's so much information on it. And I feel like I don't want to miss any parts of it, but I'm just going to speak from what I know in my experience, and we can link everything else in the podcast notes. But from also my understanding is the way, again, like media and how like Donald Trump interpreted Asians and how they're the reason why like the virus is here. And there's a retaliation that that's not true, because it's not. The virus doesn't have a race. Like there, like the virus is not Asian, you know, the virus can't have a race. And it's not the blame is not to be put on one specific culture or race. And like having the words like kung flu is very harmful, and I know you brought that up also in the blog, and there's just so many harmful things that were said in the media that made Asian people like lose businesses because people didn't want to get coronavirus from eating at a Chinese restaurant or eating at or going to a Chinese grocery store. And there's a lot of assumptions, negative assumptions made because of what's happening. And one of the I guess racial encounters that I came across, because like I work at a restaurant and I serve, and one person came up to me and he noticed I was Asian, and he's like, oh, so has anyone like made a joke to you about coronavirus? And I was like, what, why? And he's like, oh, you know, because like, you know, like she's Asian, you're Asian, you know, like Asian, right, like coronavirus. And I was like, no, because first, it's not appropriate to say this at all, and it's strange. Like that's what's put out in media is what makes people think these things, and you know, perpetuates,
it like desensitizes people, making them seem like it's normal to say those things or to talk about things in that way.
Because it's not normal. It's not okay to say it.
I think that it like affects Chinese people obviously a bit more heavily, and because some people don't know the difference between different types of Asians, they just assume every single Asian is Chinese, which is a huge problem within itself.
Or the I'm sure sometimes other races get this too, but oh, you all look the same is a huge one. I used to work at Second Cup, and there was a lot of Asian people that worked there, and there was this like angry lady that came in one time and was like, oh yeah, I was fighting with like that girl, but it wasn't that girl, and it was like, oh, whatever, you all look the same anyways.
It's so rude.
And it's like, that wasn't even when the pandemic started. So these things do happen often, and people have their own assumptions about other people's culture and races. And the reason why we brought this up, and I did say this before, is because of the shootings that are happening, and that there has been an increase, a crazy amount of increase in Asian hate, a lot in New York, and I believe it was Atlanta as well. Is it like one of the main places? But since the pandemic, I believe one of the statistics that I read, it increased to like 700%. And this doesn't just affect the States, it also affects Canada. And that I think there was also like 500% or something outrageous, that it has been increased in also Vancouver and just like on Canada in general. But yeah, it's definitely a serious issue, and that's why we wanted to we're not speaking on behalf of all Asian people, because this is just our own experience, but we are speaking up because we wanted to raise more awareness about this, and you know, start conversations, because it's really important too.
Yeah, I agree. And I talked about it in the blog post too, but I was ashamed of saying like and identifying with Asian culture. And I think that for anyone listening who feels the same way, like I think it's important to unlearn those things and to learn about your culture. And I definitely have a lot more to do and to work on myself, but it's very important to not lose that. And even just like mixing yourself with like the Canadian culture too, like accepting all sides of yourself and how you are is something that is a goal of mine.
Yeah. I think another huge part of what's happening is that it's not just, it is Asian people, but it's specifically the elderly.
Oh,
I think that's
yeah.
what hurts the most because they're the most vulnerable in the community. They've
Mm-hmm.
already experienced so much in their lifetime, and I personally don't know what they've been through.
Yeah.
But to target the elderly like that hit so hard because they just like it can't defend themselves, or like
Yeah.
they don't know how to, maybe some of them don't know how to communicate because English isn't their first language.
Mm-hmm.
But they're the elderly, like in our in like Filipino culture, I guess it would be Asian culture as well. You're supposed to respect your elders, and the fact that like that's heavily ingrained in how I grew up of like
Mm-hmm.
respecting your elders. And I also just think about like it could be anyone, like it could be my grandma or my grandpa, and like that
Yeah,
makes me want to cry for a very long time because that's awful. It's just awful.
it is.
I don't know how other way to put it, but yeah.
Yeah, I really don't understand why someone would hurt someone's like grandma, grandpa, like aunt or uncle who's an elder and like woman too. Like, because in
Yeah.
the shooting that just happened, it happened in a spa, and I believe 6 of the victims were Asian women, and that's just horrible too. Elderly and women are vulnerable in general. And then to put this other lens of being an Asian person and someone hating on Asians is another way for them to just be scared and not feel safe when they're walking outside or encountering people. And
Mm-hmm.
that just makes it so much harder to live. And
Yeah.
yeah, another thing to be worried about when we have a pandemic happening.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of intersectionalities that
Mm-hmm.
are taken into account. But yeah, this topic is very heavy, and I'm sure there are things that Edlin and I have missed out on and didn't talk about. But if there is anything that we did miss out on, like have those conversations with people and talk about it, because it is really important to
Yes.
unlearn any, like what Edlin said, unlearn any negative racial biases that we have within ourselves and try to be better people. Going back to when Black Lives Matter was starting, one of the links I found was unlearning our racial biases, and I'm going to link that in the notes as well. But it also applies to this because this is also another racial bias on a different culture, and it's reoccurring and it's not stopping. And I think that's one of the ways that we can, one of the things that we can do. And I know other ways, of course, educating ourselves,
Mm-hmm.
reading books, listening to podcasts, following people of Asian culture, and like seeing their point of view and expanding who you follow could be another one.
Yeah.
Donating, and then I miss out, petitions, signing petitions for these,
Um,
speaking up
yes. And just
is,
like when you see something, then act on it in a safe way.
yeah,
Mhm.
speaking up is a huge one.
Yeah.
Movies, watching educational movies.
Mm-hmm.
There's so many ways that people can help out the AAPI community. And for those of you who don't know what that means, Asian American Pacific Islanders community. Yeah.
Not to be like closed-minded and just be willing to learn, willing to listen and be there for your peers. And if you're feeling like hopeless in any way, then I think it's important to remember that that it's okay. And even though things suck right now, or it might suck again in the future, is that you can educate yourself and you can like make an impact, even though it is a small one. And that can just be as simple as educating yourself and sharing what you've learned with the people around you. And I think a blessing that like me and my sister have with our parents is that we're able to like speak to them. Like if they, for example, say something racist, then we could tell them, no, like you shouldn't be saying that. And even like within yourself and your community or your friend group, then you could also educate and speak to people around you. And yeah.
Yeah, because of course, like we are talking about how important this is, but we're just human and we're not perfect. There's obviously a lot for myself to learn as well. And I did want to bring up a couple more things. By bringing this up and talking about the anti-Asian racism and Stop Asian Hate, it doesn't make other anti-racism movements less important. We're all important. We're just talking about our own experiences about it, but it doesn't take away from other people experiencing their own racial encounters as well and experiencing racism in their own culture. And I think that's a huge thing because it's not about me versus you. It's more big picture, and it's like us versus them is how I think I posted I saw about that. Because I also can't, something that I was thinking of is I can't imagine what Blasian people are feeling, because it feels like they've been hit so hard because of them identifying who am I, and then their Black side getting hit with what happened, and then now their Asian side getting hit, and then it's, man, like it's hard. It's a hard time for everyone.
It is.
A huge part of it, and I know I talk about this a lot on my podcast, is mental health. For those of us who identify as Asian and are hurting, I feel for you. I'm here for you. Oh God, I'm gonna cry. But it's really hard, and just make sure you take the time for yourself. Turn off your phones if you have to. Get off social media. Like watch a cartoon from back in the day. That's what I've been doing, trying to just get less screen time or focus more on other things. Of course, it's definitely important to do all these things like education, and but also important to protect your mental health by stepping away and taking that time to be with yourself.
That's a really great point.
Yeah.
I remember when I was writing that blog post, like I literally was doing research and I was just spending the whole morning. And even when I was writing that, like literally crying about it, because it's really hard to hear these things happening in the world. And on top of like just regular things that you have to deal with every day. Like everyone deals with tough things, and then you have this other whole thing to worry about. And just take time for yourself and know that things do suck right now, but like this isn't normal. And that's why I think it's so important again to reach out to others and to make sure that your community feels safe and supported.
And heard. Yeah, I think like a huge part about it is like this is being brought up, but then some people may be making it feel like it's not important, I guess, if that makes sense. They're like, oh, but like you're Asian, it doesn't really, like, whatever, like your stuff doesn't really matter that much, and it's not true. Diminishing other people's experiences and like gaslighting them. And for those who don't know what gaslighting means, it is a subtle form of emotional manipulation that results in the recipient doubting their perception of reality and insanity. So it's like diminishing your racial encounters because it doesn't matter when it does. Or like whatever you're going through, that it's like, oh, whatever, it's not that serious. Like it is serious. What you're feeling matters, what you're going through matters. This, I guess we'll just end it here. I know this is a lot that we talked about. We talked about us growing up as Asian and Filipino, our Filipino culture, and Asian representation in the media, what we can do, what's going on in the world right now in terms of the pandemic and Asians, and protecting ourselves and protecting the people in our community. And thank you for everyone, or to anyone who's listening to this. Be safe and be kind. Take care of yourselves. I think that's all I really have to say. And if we miss anything, like, please feel free to share any comments or your own stories, and take that time for yourself.
Thank you for having me on your podcast again.
Thanks,
It's
Edline.
such a it's such a heavy topic, but it's really important, and definitely a lens that I like recently reflected on and am working towards becoming better, and in terms of like being an ally to my other Asian people suffering from what's going on right now. And yeah.
Thank you so much to Edline for being a guest again and for talking about this with me. Did you want to share any ads or anything that we could follow you on?
I guess you could follow me on Instagram if you'd like, and also like to shout out Locals Festival. We have our first festival of the year coming up in April 10th to 11th. So we are having some Asian artists and small businesses on there that we're going to be featuring. So, and also other minorities as well. So I think all around great event to support if you'd like to. So yeah, we could also leave that in the down bar or
the
description.
notes. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Locals Festival, it's going to be really awesome. We're also supporting One Tree Planted as our charity of choice for this festival. So we are planting trees for spring. So yeah, I'll leave all that information down below. And thank you so much to everyone who's listening. Thank you again, Edline. And
bye. Thank you.
Bye.